you for coming this morning. I assume that you've come here because you want to learn about something that can maybe help learners who are struggling to develop a functional communication system. And that's what I'm going to talk about. So before I get started, I will let you know that SVO Power is a proprietary product. There's an app in development. It's not completed yet. And there is also an instructional manual with a curriculum that's being developed so that you'll be able to have instructions as well as goal banks and be able to follow along kind of from some base level skills to start at and go further. But with that being said, everything we're going to talk about today is stuff that you can take and go use immediately when you see another client. So, and I'll explain more about that as we go on. But basically, the app that I'm developing with my father, actually, the app is going to be ideal for using SVO Power and for these kinds of learners. Let me get out of here. But as you'll see as I go forward, the whole concept of SVO Power is meant to be paired with some form of AAC, and it really can be anything, and I'll talk about that. But point being, yeah, we're developing an app that we hope will be the best, that will elicit what we want and what I have figured and over testing and experimentation that's going to be the best thing for these clients. But that's not your only option. So what we talk about today, I hope that you will be able to take with you and go use immediately. So today, the title of the presentation, SVO Power, a language development curriculum and iPad app for learners who struggle to develop functional communication. Today, the things that I'm going to cover, I'm going to give you a little bit of my background so you know kind of who you're talking to. I want to talk about the rationale and motivation for why and how this program came to be. I'm going to give you a description and a good broad overview of what SVO Power is. I'm going to talk about some of the barriers to traditional methods of teaching communication to these kinds of learners, and then go through some case studies, just kind of show you some examples of different goals that you can implement and use SVO Power with. And then also I'll briefly talk about data collection and the app itself, and that will kind of conclude the entire presentation. I will tell you there's probably a good 40 minutes of video, and it'll be broken down with a little bit of space in between. So hopefully that will, I know it's hard to sit through these sometimes, so hopefully the video will keep you, give you a little break in between the talking. But we will get started. I'm going to tell you about my background, my experience that's brought me to this point. Before I received my bachelor's degree in speech pathology, I was in Arkansas. And I started working in an in-home applied behavior analysis program back, this was in '02. And so at the time, I think that was kind of just starting to come onto the scene where people were having in-home ABA programs, and that really piqued my interest. But I was in school for speech pathology, and so I graduated, went on to from University of Arkansas, Little Rock, and then I moved to Louisiana to get my master's degree in speech language pathology at Louisiana Tech University. So while I was in my bachelor's program, I also minored in sign language and almost got an associate's in interpreting for the deaf. So that was a really good focus for me as well. So I kind of had an interest in deafness and an interest in autism. So I go on to get my master's in speech path, but kind of continue the focus on ABA at the same time. Like I just knew that what I had experienced, I wanted to know more about, and I kind of, every project I could do, I did on ABA, and I just continued to kind of keep those focuses parallel a little bit. So then I moved to Texas, and I started working in the school setting. I worked in a high school with your typical high school caseload, and then I also worked for a regional day school program for the deaf. And really enjoyed that experience. I would say I like working with older people in general, so I liked that about it. And then it gave me a way to really strengthen my signing skills by working with older students who were deaf. So I'm grateful for that opportunity. So soon after that, I learned about a PhD program at UNT. It was grant funded, and it was called Project STAR, Systematic Training for Autism Researchers and School Personnel. I had already signed up to take my BCBA classes. Well, it turned out the BCBA classes, Board Certified Behavior Analyst, the certification for those that are in ABA, turned out those classes were built into the PhD program. It was just one of those things where it just worked out. It seemed like it was just meant to be. And so I went and did that, and my dissertation was on speech-language pathologist knowledge of autism and applied behavior analysis. And so that survey went out, and that's what I did my dissertation research on. So in 2007, the beginning of the PhD, that's kind of when I started working privately. And in the last year, I got my BCBAD, Board Certified Behavior Analyst doctoral. So now I kind of wear two hats. But I identify primarily as a speech-language pathologist, and I use the knowledge that I have from the field of ABA to kind of help make decisions about how I'm going to change rates of behavior, increase, decrease, just understanding that the science behind it guides a lot of the practice and what I do in my sessions, in my speech sessions. So probably in 2011, when Proloquo to Go came on the scene, and when all my clients mostly are people who call me, have kids that are low verbal, no speech, functionally not communicating. And that's kind of the clientele that I work with. And so raise your, just so I know, are you familiar with Proloquo to Go? Okay, so everybody's kind of used it at some point or another. So when that kind of came onto the scene, I started using, all my clients' parents were buying it, and so I kind of started playing with it and doing some of my own programming on it, and that's what, as I'll describe later, kind of evolved into SVO Power. So, hopefully, do you work with learners who are having difficulty moving beyond one-word utterances? That was my issue, I was working with learners who I knew were capable, I knew they were smart, I knew they could do it, but it just wasn't happening. I was like trying everything. So, though that is kind of the ideal candidate for what we're talking about today, SVO Power can be used with other types of clients, but originally that was kind of my motivation for how this started evolving into what it is now. So what is SVO Power? SVO Power is a language development curriculum designed for learners who struggle to develop functional communication and move beyond one-word utterances. SVO Power is meant to be paired with one or more forms of AAC. The curriculum was developed for learners with language delays and disorders, especially those with ASDs and developmental disabilities. So what does SVO stand for? SVO stands for Subject, Verb, Object. And SVO is the language equation that serves as the foundation for the entire SVO Power curriculum. So everything I do related to this is all about that equation. Everything I target, everything I teach it with the SVO. And so the reason for that, these three parts of speech hold the power to convey almost any message, and that is the magic behind SVO Power. I'll get into how and why I started doing that, but the reason I named what I'm doing SVO Power is because the power that is held within those parts of speech is great. And it gives a learner an opportunity to really convey a message without, because we tend to start targeting a lot of other parts of speech and things like that, and then we end up with not a really functional communication system at 10 years old, but we've spent a lot of time in a lot of different places instead of focusing, I believe, like, if you have that kind of learner, this is not for everyone, if you have this kind of learner, then this can be a great foundation for them to start off to develop a communication system that's really functional. So the origins for kind of how this started evolving, once I was using the Proloquo to Go and designing some of my own programming on it, because I felt that, I would go to the core user, the basic user. My kids can't do that. I mean, that's overwhelming for for them to look at. It's just too complex. I mean, and you know, we want to give them some kind of AAC, and a lot of times we're signing or whatever, but if we choose to use a voice output device, and I love Go, it's done wonders for, I use it daily. It's done wonders for my clients. But when I just open the generic things that it's programmed with, that I feel that it's too complex for the kind of kids that I work with. And so that's how, like I said, I started developing my own pages. So a couple of the theoretical backgrounds that kind of led to the SVO power method are my background in American Sign Language. One of the core syntax structures in American Sign Language is SVO. You got like SVO and OSV. So you have subject, verb, object, or object, subject, verb. So me go store, or store, me go. And then you would have your temporal marker at the beginning, yesterday, me go store. And then you would have your negation at the end, yesterday, me go store, no, not. So I kind of started thinking about, okay, well, people who use ASL are getting their points across by using just these parts of speech. And so the other aspect that kind of really influenced was my experience in verbal behavior in ABA. So I know ABA and verbal behavior has become more and more popular in the school system. Are you guys exposed to verbal behavior somewhere? A little bit? Okay, so in verbal behavior, for those of you that are involved, this will be a review, but you're going to hear words like command, tact, interverbal, echoic. And so a mand is synonymous with request, a tact is a label, interverbal is a response, more or less, to a question, echoic is an imitation, and then you have your receptive, similar to the same kind of language we would use in speech path. And so basically in 1957, Skinner wrote a book, Skinner's Analysis of Verbal Behavior, and he discussed his theory on how language is developed based on from a behavioral standpoint. And so the reason I point that out is because I take this language equation, the SVO language equation, and I kind of started saying, okay, well, I'm going to run it through the mand or the request, run it through the tact or the label, and take it through each of these things in different goals. And so those two things, plus I always have to mention my 6th grade English teacher, Pam Jameson in Hot Springs, Arkansas, because she was amazing and she used the Shirley method. I don't know if anybody knows what that is. Normally they don't when I ask. I swear I learned everything I know about grammar from 6th grade, and I am dying to get the Shirley method out and try it with some of my kids, because it was like, really, truly, I believe it's impacted this as well. So I don't know if I can find her on Facebook, but I should probably send her a message and let her know, you know. But, okay, so some other key features of SVO Power: highly personalized video and learning activities, very individualized, total communication approach. I support using as many different aspects like you would in a deaf ed classroom, where you're talking and you're signing. Maybe you're using a device, maybe you're using pictures, because that's kind of that multi-sensory learning opportunity. If you are using an iPad, which is what I primarily do most of my work on, you're getting the tactile, you're getting the visual, you're getting the auditory, so you're kind of getting that multi-sensory experience that way, which I think we know, it's going to be better overall if they can get it, because they're going to more likely get it in some way. And so it is meant to be paired with AAC. So it is something that can be used augmentatively or alternatively. So I'm going to back up a little bit, because I noticed, and I'm still trying to kind of figure out the best way to explain some of this, but a lot of times I feel like people leave hearing me and think that this is straight up voice output AAC communication system, or that's what I'm going for. And the more I've done it, the more I've realized, yes, it is used as a voice output for kiddos that cannot use their speech, or their speech isn't clear, but it's also, I find myself more and more and more using it as a teaching tool to teach concepts, more so than it does talk, yes, it speaks when we use